Hi, Rethinking Humanitarianism listeners. As I'm recording this, Sudan is just days away from marking an unfortunate milestone. On the 15th of April, it will have been 1 year since the start of the conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Since then, 8.2 million people have been displaced. Up to 15,000 people have been killed in one West Darfur city alone, according to the United Nations. And a looming famine threatens to kill many more across the country. We thought it would be a good time to replay this episode from last October. It's about Sudan's mutual aid networks. They're called emergency response rooms. And the episode talks about how the international aid system, that's the UN, international donors, international NGOs, were just starting to recognize the key role that ERRs played in humanitarian response, but they were struggling to figure out how to get the money. At the end of this episode, you'll hear an update from both of our guests. I caught up with Hajooj Kuka, the External Communications Officer for the Khartoum Emergency Response Rooms, and we receive an audio update from Francesco Bonanome, a Humanitarian Affairs Officer for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, also known as OCHA. A quick warning for listeners, this episode mentions sexual violence. Please take care while listening.
Past 6 months has caused untold suffering in Sudan. Some 5.4 million have fled their homes and are totally displaced within Sudan or in neighboring countries. That's an average of about 30,000 a day, many fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Sudan has become the world's fastest growing displacement crisis.
People are just trying to survive this. We see Sudanese people restoring to popular and mutual aid, which is the only thing that they have. The concept of mutual aid is what's sustaining the people, not the international aid, diplomats.
Since the spring, fighting between two Sudanese military factions has claimed thousands of lives, led to mass displacement, and created a major humanitarian crisis.
As international NGOs and the United Nations evacuated their international staff and struggled to access certain areas, decentralized mutual aid networks, known as emergency response rooms, have stepped in to fill the vacuum. And they continue to power the humanitarian response today.
Is this the beginning of mutual aid as a central organizing principle in humanitarian relief? And how are major international humanitarian organizations shifting to acknowledge this reality, if at all?
From Geneva, Switzerland, I'm Hiba Ali.
And from Toronto, Canada, I'm Melissa Fundira. This is Rethinking Humanitarianism, a podcast about the future of aid in a world of rising crisis. Since war broke out between the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, in April, more than half of Sudan's population is in need of assistance. That's nearly 25 million Sudanese men, women, and children struggling to find shelter, food, safety, and meet other basic needs. Because of security concerns, the number of international NGOs operating in Sudan has halved. International staff have largely been evacuated out of danger zones like the capital Khartoum and the western province of Darfur. And cuts in donor funding have put local staff out of a job.
Where international organizations haven't been able to operate, local emergency response rooms, or ERRs, have stepped in. Often described as nimble, agile, and flexible, these community and volunteer-based groups have been providing everything from shelter and rape kits to food, water, and electricity. The international humanitarian sector doesn't usually partner with these kinds of groups. It's more used to working with national NGOs at best. But now the heads of major organizations, like the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, say they want that to change.
And so what we as USAID are doing is we are trying to transition from, an assistance model in emergencies that has tended to go mainly through the UN and other large international actors to recognizing that there are these nimble, brave, resilient forces who are community-based.
6 months on from the start of the conflict, how is the formal humanitarian system's transition to community-based aid in Sudan working in practice? What's its potential? What's getting in the way? And what are the problems with this model?
What's for sure is that there is a cadre of people who have been working behind the scenes to make partnerships between donors, UN agencies, and international NGOs on the one hand, and mutual aid groups on the other, a reality. We are joined by two of those people today. Hajooj Kuka is the External Communications Officer for the Khartoum State Emergency Response Rooms. He is also an activist and filmmaker. Hajooj has been based outside of Sudan since the war broke out. Today, he joins us from Nairobi. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And Francesco Bonanome is the Humanitarian Affairs Officer for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Sudan. And he's the focal point within OCHA for the Emergency Response Rooms. He also joins us from Nairobi, where he was evacuated to. Francesco, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Hajooj, I want to start with you. Take me back to those early days in April when the conflict broke out. How did these emergency response rooms come to be?
And the first thing we tried to do when war broke out was try to figure out what can we do? How can we help? So one of the first things we started doing is connecting to folks that we knew from the humanitarian, NGO world and whatnot. And they were like, oh, we're so busy with evacuation, we can't really do anything. So then we started these conversations. And basically what we did, I actually got a group of them, put them on a WhatsApp group, and we started meeting with them weekly. And they started giving us terminologies like mutual aid. It's the first time I hear about mutual aid. I come from the resistance committees. I come back from a background of activism, trying to figure out how do we get parliaments and whatnot. So to me, it was very new. So when I heard the word mutual aid, I was going around reading about it. Then I heard the word solidarity economy. And we started brainstorming with my group about, okay, the supply chain, trying to figure out how do we get the traders to work with us and whatnot. And slowly trying to figure out what can we do. In the beginning, there was a lot of money that coming from diaspora. Diaspora was helping out. So the day the war broke out, the second day, people were sending money in. The banking system was up and down. So people were figuring out ways to send money back home. People were helping each other, whatnot. So mutual aid started from day number one. And now that we had a word for it, we understood that we started the operation. And we would hear it in the news that no aid is coming to Khartoum. No aid has arrived yet. And we've been hearing those terms, and it kind of feels wrong because every single Sudanese knows that they've been sending money to their family and whatnot. And the evacuation that happened in the beginning was done by the people themselves. It got to the point where a bus ticket that used to be for $50 became $700. And it was not paid by internationals. It wasn't paid by outside. It was paid by the people themselves. And it was paid by family members putting their money together, sending it back home. So from the beginning, the evacuation that happened was Sudanese-led. Of course, after a while, the middle class left. The people who had people outside to help them, they left. So you were left with the communities that were not getting any salaries. They were not getting any income. So slowly, things were drying up, and then they needed help. And that's when the conversations we've been having were very important. How do we get internationals to help us? And how do we get mutual aid to not just be this side thing that's happening and to be the way that aid goes to Khartoum? Because up to now, very little aid got to Khartoum, especially to the areas that are controlled by RSF.
So maybe that's a good moment to pivot to the international partnership. When did you come to hear of this funny acronym OCHA as part of this journey? So
I never heard of OCHA. I never knew what OCHA was. To us, it's the UN, yeah? Everything was the UN. And now I know that there's WFP, UNICEF, and everything had to be explained to me. And these acronyms are crazy. Up to today, to me, the language of humanitarians and how they talk and how they ask questions, I still have to kind of get it translated, and I still have to ask them, okay, can you explain what you just said? So the base ERs is a huge base of thousands of people. So when we have our meetings and try to translate, even when we translate things into Arabic, not everything makes sense. So it's been a lot of work to try to come up with what come from the grassroots, what comes from the way we do things, translate that for the internationals to understand. So we have to be like, we're doing women co-ops, and what women's co-op is, it's group cash transfer. So we had to find that and say it to them. But for us, we have to actually transfer it the other way. It's like, okay, they're saying this, they mean this. That's why you don't get excited about individual cash transfer, because it requires all these. So it's like trying to translate these words. And I'm not even sure if our Arabic translations are accurate, because we're just making it ourselves. Like there's this black box in the middle and trying to understand things. And slowly we're learning more. We're learning from interactions, from reading, from catching up. But what we've noticed is because of the way the Sudanese revolution was, because we were neighborhood based, because we were already organized, because we were already connected, that we are the perfect example of what mutual aid can be. And we're the perfect partners. And we just need folks who actually believe in it to sit with us and be okay with us not knowing the terminologies and okay with us working the way we are. And thankfully, we found those. There's a huge difference between the organizations and the institutions and the individuals. Because I think with the humanitarian aid, the individuals have gotten to the point where they really believe that this needs to be decolonized. There's a new way of doing things, and they believe in it. And then there's the system that is way not ready for it.
I mean, one of the individuals in question is sitting right here with us. That's Francesco. I'd like to bring you in. You became the focal point for these emergency response rooms within OCHA. Paint for me a picture a little bit of how that partnership came to be. What was the response from you as an individual and then from the organization as well?
Since the beginning of the conflict, there was an internal discussion across the different actors in the UN and especially within OCHA to try to foresee and understand how to try to respond to an emergency that was completely changing the scenario of Sudan. In that sense, almost immediately after the evacuation of the United Nations, the emergency relief coordinator, Martin Griffith, met actually with some representative of the civil society, including representative of the emergency rooms, with the idea to try to explore and understand how these groups were already operating on the ground. Because we felt the urgency of trying to think out of the box and try to provide a new strategy that was not ready before the conflict. As you mentioned before, the UN didn't used to have a strong interaction with the civil society before the conflict. It's kind of a new environment in which we have been starting exploring, but we started almost immediately after. So before I joined this portfolio, a colleague of mine was the first person that actually started engaging in the relationship with Hajooj and other colleagues from the emergency rooms, with the intent to try, first of all, to understand their capacity, how they're structure, in which areas of the country, because we were really starting from scratches. And from there, then when I started being head of this portfolio around July of this year, my role has become more and more trying to bring partners to work and collaborate with emergency rooms, especially in areas where accessibility is extremely challenging, but also with the idea to try to expand this kind of collaboration in a longer term. So it's really trying to shift the approach and starting to see the emergency rooms as a complementary actor in the humanitarian response. So this was in a nutshell, the beginning of our collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me an example of what that partnership actually looks like? Because you're saying that you're sort of the bridge between, bringing in new partners to then support the ERRs. What does that concretely look like on the ground?
So on the ground, we have what we can consider the coordination between OCHA and the emergency rooms. So we have weekly meetings with them, generally that are chaired by our head of office. And these meetings initially had the purpose not only to provide them information around the overall situation and provide them an update around their response ongoing, and our organization are trying to arrange themselves, but also to try to get from their side an understanding on how they are operating, which are the challenges that they are facing. So this is a regular weekly meeting that was happening between the two parties. Based on that, then my role was to expand that kind of engagement. So my engagement with the emergency room turned into to be a daily engagement in which we literally sit down and discuss, mostly with the Hajooj, but also with some other members of the emergency rooms. I've been discussing the challenges, the operations, which are the priorities for them, and based on the kind of needs that they are coming from their side. And this is, I think, is the interesting part of this approach, because it's not the UN that are trying to actually set the agenda for the type of a collaboration with them, but it's vice versa. The approach is very much trying to understand the needs of the emergency rooms, and based on that, link them to the right actors to provide a response. For instance, when it comes to the response around access to water and rehabilitation of water station or rehabilitation of wells and things like that, the ERRs already within their groups, they have engineers that have been dedicating themselves to try to figure it out how to do it. So my job has been to bring those people into the conversation within the WASH cluster, so to try to see if there were or there are organizations that are capable to provide supplies or to provide support, economic and financial support to these groups to implement and guarantee a sustainable response in the medium long term.
But the rubber hits the road when it comes to the money, I suppose. And I was listening to a panel discussion about mutual aid just this morning that Hajooj participated in. And a lot of the Western government donors that were part of that conversation, for example, Ireland and the UK, said they found the concept very intriguing. Mutual aid sounded very compelling, but that they were very far from actually engaging with it. And that for them, they were very proud of having made progress in the more traditional notion of localization, but mutual aid groups was like a whole other world. If the goal of all of this is to get more resources to the mutual aid groups, where are the donors on this journey?
So when it comes to donors, we can see progress. There are some major donors that have been starting exploring the possibility and actually also advocating for their partners to start engaging with the emergency rooms. So we have seen, for instance, USAID is becoming more and more active. We have seen ECHO, in a way, start to piloting some activities. Obviously, when it comes to the donors community, but also to the UN, I have to say in some part, accountability is still the main concern. So part of my role has been also try to review and try to also suggest a new modality of engagement with these actors that prevent these actors to be the real accountable for when it comes to providing information around funds, because this is the risk that we are kind of facing, trying to approach the emergency rooms like any other national NGOs. So to try to prevent this, pass me the term, NGOization of the emergency rooms, my role has been the one of trying to clearly detach and distinguish what is an NGO and what is an emergency room, and why the local responders, in order to continue to be agile and be responsive, they need to be removed from all those accountable components that are normally part of a regular engagement between the donors and a national or international NGO. So I would say that when it comes to donor, there has been progress, for sure. We are still far away for having a systematized approach in which all donors are on the same page when it comes to providing funds to partners to work closely with these groups, or even to start having a direct engagement with the ERR itself.
I'm curious for you, Hajooj, on the receiving end of that. What has been your experience with trying to get the emergency rooms recognized by these, international donors, UN agencies, INGOs? Are you able to be seen as legitimate within the existing funding systems?
From the beginning, when we had the first discussions with the few internationals we were talking to, the thing that rose is how do we become a body that they can deal with us? Also, the other thing is we come from a revolutionary background, yeah. So, and the idea of having good governance, transitional to democracy, the idea of separation of power was really important for us. So, when we started thinking about these two things, how do we find the structure? We were it makes sense to have a structure that is based on the idea of good governance. So, from the beginning, we started transparency, equality, participation, accountability are top of our list. And when we talked about accountability, it was always, we start with accountability to our community. So for that happened, we decided from the beginning, we're going to go for 100% transparency. What that means is the moment we get money, we post it on our Facebook page so our communities understand it, and we try to tell them as much information that the donors are okay with. Most of the times, the donors are not okay with stating their names, so we will just say we received this amount of money and we distribute it this way. And the way we worked was going to the idea of we wanted to have local parliaments. So we set up a structure of local parliaments. Khartoum is divided into 7 districts. So we get 3 representatives from each district. They decide on what we do. And then we have charter. So that's our constitution. So from the beginning, how we deal with each other, if there's a problem, if anything happened, we have this constitutional paper that has been super helpful in resolving any issues that we had. And then we have the working groups. And the working groups were divided. There was the committees. So programming, reporting, finance, and external comms. And all these were made so we will be able to clearly talk to internationals, and really makes a lot of sense. And then we had offices, and the offices were created in a way that resembles the clusters. So we have health, we have services, we have the women response room, we have food security and protection. And then we slowly started noticing that things that we already do, for example, we have this communal kitchen. So the communal kitchen was a very important thing that we started having, because this oral work is around 2 things: health and then food. And with food, the first thing that started wasn't lack of food, it was lack of cooking gas. And we needed to cook together. And that's when we went down to a school and people started cooking. The first example was in Umbadda, and then people started copying it. Women started cooking, and then people started doing different activities. And there was a woman break room that started, Istiraha Nasawiya. And then slowly we started noticing, when we started having a protection group, is that the women break room is a place that is a woman's only room, which is a safe room. And that when we have children and we started teaching them and doing stuff, then we created a child safe space. So slowly we started noticing that what we did naturally actually fell into this idea of what humanitarian aid is. And when we started thinking that way, we were able to more apply for funds and figure out how to do it. One more thing, from the beginning, our idea was never to work alone. So it was always to work with partnerships. So one thing we did was within the WhatsApp group I talked to you about in the beginning, we had this idea that internationals need to talk to each other, so they shouldn't compete. But the same way local NGOs need to come sit together, they need not to compete. So we started having money from the Sudan Humanitarian Fund was to get local NGOs that will work with us to be in a board, and they all sit in a board with our representatives, and they all together decide how should the money be spent, and trying to make sure that everything comes from the base ERs.
And I want to come back to the Sudan Humanitarian Fund created by OCHA in a minute. But first, how do you address the concerns that Francesco mentioned about accountability to the donors? Because that's always been the blockage, right? So what are you doing that is convincing the donors that you are accountable for the funds?
When we first started, it was one person sending us $1,000 that went through the system, and we had to give them the names of the people we're going to send the money through. So they have to do it through this terrorist list to make sure it works. And then we had to do the reporting when money got sent, having the receipts of the money, and then also writing a report. So that was for $1,000. And then from then we got a first donation of $50,000. And then with that, it was distributed into 7 districts. From the 7 districts down to, we have 69 different response rooms. There's very little money that trickled down. And they had to write reports. And then we got it together in our officer of reporting, and they wrote a report. So there's a financial report and a narrative report. And the report is this amazing piece of paper. We have it on our website, and it's so diverse because each room just decides on what they want to do. So even when I was looking at it, it's just like, wow, this is like crazy. It goes all the way from health, being in a hospital, doing stuff with women, dealing with rapes. It was this whole big genre of different activities that were done with these different random people.
Francesco, I see you nodding. Are these the kinds of reports that would meet the requirements of bilateral governments?
I think here there is a broader discussion to do. I think what the emergency rooms has been providing so far to justify and to guarantee the accountability has been incredibly good and qualitative extremely high, considering also the challenges that they are facing on a daily basis when it comes to the operation that they are carrying forward in areas that are extremely isolated at the moment and extremely challenging and dangerous. I think going back a little bit towards what Hajooj was mentioning around the system that is not ready, I think that part of the accountability discussion that, and this is part of the engagement and the discussion I'm trying to do with donors, but also with international partners, is that accountability needs to be slightly shift from the emergency rooms back to the international organizations that are working with these groups, in the sense that we are capable to have an open and direct conversation with these groups to make sure that actually not only they are operating, but they can also provide us like a testimony of the fact that they are doing their job. For instance, providing photos rather than having direct conversation, providing some data when is necessary and so on. But when it comes to reporting, when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to concept notes, I think that's a responsibility that needs to be taken by the international organization. Otherwise, we are incurring again in the same mistakes that I was mentioning before, trying to transform these groups into organization, which is not their entity, is not their willing also to become an organization. So in order to keep them agile, I think the accountability needs to be shifted back towards the organization that are engaging with these groups. There are modalities to do it. There are modalities to still collect information and even writing reporting through just simply collecting information through these groups, but avoiding the situation of having these groups to be involved for weeks in reporting and writing back, because this is not their main purpose. Their main purpose is to respond, be in the streets, and be agile and directly be engaging with the communities on a daily basis. So that's where the discussion needs to start. That's exactly where the approach needs to change. And I think with some organization, we are getting there. I wouldn't say is homogeneous at the moment, the scenario, but there are more and more organizations that are understanding the need to shift and try to reduce the burden also of the paperwork that normally an organization is required to actually address before receiving certain amount of funds.
So at the top of the episode, we heard Samantha Power say that she wants USAID to be able to, quote, tap into Sudanese ingenuity. Presumably, she's referring to the ERRs here. And she goes on to add that she wants USAID to provide more community-based assistance and move away from traditional channels like the UN. Hajooj, have you seen any changes in your funding since organizations like USAID and the UN have said that they want to work with you more closely?
So we've got a lot of promises. We're expecting a lot of money to come in, a lot compared to what we had from before. Up to now, from the war starting in 6 months, we got about $200,000, and we have promises for $2 million. I'll just give you an example. We have a partnership with UNICEF, with a local NGO, and also I think also with Sudan Humanitarian Fund. We were told that they needed to do 20 waivers to allow us to get the money. So they had to change the system already. And after doing the 20 waiver, I know with UNICEF, we got to the point where that's it. They get all the okays, everybody's down, let's do it. And somebody was trying to put it on the computer system and they weren't able to do it because this computer system would not go forward. So they had to actually even wait for another 2 weeks or something to change something in the computer system to even allow us to go forward. Thankfully, we heard that finally a contract was signed between the local NGO that's working with us and UNICEF. And we're talking about urgency. Yeah, this is an emergency response. This is where every day we're losing time. Somebody's getting killed, somebody's getting raped, somebody's like getting hungry. We have volunteers who just give up, thinking that we just keep promising them, so they start leaving. So the urgency is not there. People are trying, but we're waiting. Every day we're trying to give them a call. It's like, okay, so did we get the money? It's like, oh, no, not yet. So what's happening? Somebody needs to sign. Something needs to happen. And so the bureaucracy is so crazy that we've just been sitting there promising people, hey, we're going to get stuff, to the point that I stopped trying to ask people, don't get us more data. Don't do this. Let's just get this money, wait for it to get this money, and then we can go forward. The amount of times we collected data is just crazy, and it's really hard to get data at this level, and data keeps changing because people keep moving. So right now, our biggest thing is there's no urgency. The moment we have to do something, we have to actually fall back onto mutual aid, fall back onto our own communities to do anything that's at the level of anything being emergent, urgent, needs to be done today.
And a case in point, I suppose, is the Sudan Humanitarian Fund that you mentioned earlier, where OCHA has allocated $3 million to the emergency response rooms and to local women's groups. Francesco, has that money been delivered?
So the money has been delivered to the international organization, is in the process to be delivered to the emergency rooms. I'm not personally in charge of following that, so I cannot give you exact information on where this money is, but the money is with the international organization. Going back a little bit to what Hajooj was saying, the understanding of the urgency is very much understood, at least from the people that are working on a daily basis, even in Sudan, on the emergency. But I fully agree with him that the system is not fit for purpose at the moment. I think the timing that it takes to provide money to these groups is too long. The system has never been ready for this before. So part of the advocacy that OCHA is doing, even internally to his own HQ, because we recognize that we are the first one that we need to provide an example if we really want to change a little bit the system, is to really make them understand that we need to find a way to provide fast money, fast funds to these groups, even within a certain amount. But the beauty of the emergency rooms is that they are capable to provide incredible services, even with relatively small amounts compared to what we are used to see in an international NGO project or a national NGO project. So the reality is that there must be a way to provide funds in a fast way to these groups to operate in a certain way. Unfortunately, the system has never been ready for this. So exactly what Hajooj was saying, like trying to change the system in a bureaucratic institution like the UN, it takes a lot of time. And unfortunately, we don't have that time. So a lot of the advocacy that is coming through is very much towards this need of changing and trying to facilitate a better engagement and a faster engagement with these groups. Unfortunately, it takes time. At the moment, we are still not ready. I think there has been some progress. I have to say, I agree with Hajooj. There has been a lot of promises. I have to say, I'm quite confident that most of these promises will land. The problem is that they will land in a time that in which the situation might be still either the same or get much worse. So maybe what we are requesting them to try to address by the time that the funds will arrive won't be possible, or it will require additional funds simply because the situation escalated and the needs also skyrocket. So the reality is that yes, I think things are moving forward. I think there is the possibility for the emergency rooms to actually receive quite a lot amount of money in the next coming future to address challenges, but the system is too slow. We are like almost 7 months into the conflict, and the emergency room so far have received $200,000. This is not enough. I acknowledge that as a person that works closely and on a daily basis with Hajooj and other colleagues. I understand that very much, but the system at the global level is not ready still to absorb this kind of shift in a very short term, unfortunately.
I'm curious to know, I guess, why you have so much confidence that the money will land. I mean, we spoke to a humanitarian worker who's quite familiar with the situation in Sudan between the ERRs and the UN and the international organization. And they told us anonymously that, they corroborated this fact that only $200,000 have actually reached the ERRs. And this person is honestly quite terrified that the ERRs are running out of money, that soup kitchens have already had to close, and they're honestly quite furious that the money has yet to arrive because it's been, months and months and months of being told it's coming next week, for reasons that I think you agree basically amount to bureaucracy. So what do you say to that? Like, how can you be so sure that this money will actually land?
Starting from the SHF, I can tell you that is in the project design of the 3 million to provide at least only for Khartoum $500,000. So the time is the challenge, But the fact that those $500,000 will reach the ERR, there's no question about it. And that's what I can say for the SHF. When it comes to the other partners, I have a direct and good engagement with some of the international NGOs that have been most engaged with the ERR in the recent time. And with some of them, I'm confident, partially because I know the people. They have no reason to lie to me because I'm not their donor. So there's no reason for them to tell me something that is opposite to the reality. And based on the information I collect, they feel confident. UNICEF, they have another project and engagement in pipeline. It took a lot of time, but they signed the agreement with this national NGO. I think the commitment is very much there. When it comes, for example, to UNICEF, UNICEF has been an incredible partner. From day one, since I had a conversation with them, they've been on board. But as I said, the system is low. And the system is low for UNICEF as much as it's low for OCHA, as much as it's low for WFP or other partners as well. And on that, I cannot do anything if not agreeing with Hajooj and agreeing with the ERR that is a concern, is a major concern.
Hajooj, do you share Francesco's optimism?
Even more. I know the money is coming. And by the way, the 200,000, part of it came from philanthropists.
I was just going to ask actually where that 200,000 came from, because they managed to move quickly.
Yes, they managed to move quickly. There's another international NGO that doesn't want to say their name, actually had money already because when they left Sudan, they already had money. So we just put it for us. And it was great because that was the money that came really quickly. So we were able to test our systems and work. So if we didn't have that money, it would have been horrendous for us. So it was really amazing to have the money and be able to test it and do the reports. And we did share some of the money with Darfur, so they can actually do the same thing, set up their systems and use that money as a learning. It was like a no regret. So definitely, I'm pretty sure we're going to get the money. I'm 100% positive. The money did move from Sudan Humanitarian Fund into this international NGO that we're talking to daily. Once all that bureaucracy is done, we have to deal with the idea that money needs to move from one banking system into another, and then come to the ground, which is another thing that we have to deal with. There's always a waiting game until the money actually gets to the ground. I have to say one more thing. It's not always money. Sometimes it's partnership. For example, UNICEF gave us a training for gender-based violence to our women response room. So that was something that was already done. So the partnership is as important as everything else. And the weekly meetings we have with OCHA, it made everybody believe that, okay, this group is legit. They're talking to OCHA every day. They're doing this, they're doing that. So all these things have, one, gave us the standing, but also made everybody proud of the work they're doing, believe in what they're doing, and step it up. But then if the money doesn't come in, then everything collapses. So one thing, for example, that was asked of our group, and I heard them answer it, and I still love it till today, when they were asked about risk. What is the risk? And they were saying the number one risk is not to have the resources to do the work, because once we don't have that, then we don't exist. And when it comes to the risk of security risk, we're in a war zone. At any moment, a bomb can fall on us. But actually, if we cannot do our work, the second risk is social. If the community does not trust us, if we're not transparent, 100% transparent, tell the community everything, and they don't trust us, then that's a social risk that's even higher than security risk.
We've been talking about this idea of mutual aid groups partnering with the international system as an unequivocal good. And I'm curious whether you see some risks of engaging, whether it's through funding or through the kinds of partnerships you've been describing with the international community, because the more I hear you talk, the more you start to sound to me like a traditional aid organization that's saying we need more money, we want the money, rather than this kind of volunteer-based spirit that was at your heart. And we heard Francesco say earlier, there is this risk. And I heard it in the discussion this morning as well, of you becoming kind of co-opted by this big bureaucratic system and losing the very thing that makes ERRs what they are. So how do you think about the risks of this kind of engagement?
Yeah, let's be clear. I'm trying to get 5 to 10% of the international aid to actually go directly to the ERs. So that's the amount that we're thinking about. In the beginning, we had resources. So people had food in their houses. They used to bring it in. People were getting money. People were doing things. So these soup kitchens were working, and people got used to these communal kitchens where they come together and they talk and they laugh. That is their main source of one meal a day that they get. Yeah. So it became really essential. 6 months into it, there's all these millions who left, but there's like about 6 million people who stayed in Khartoum. There's millions in Darfur. So we're talking about millions of people 6 months into it, not getting paid, the economy just collapsing and getting to the point where I have to depend on this. It's not like that luxury of that we had in the beginning of having diaspora and everything. So I think the shift is it's still community-based. Nobody's getting paid. All of us are volunteers who are actually paying out of pocket and spending money and leaving our lives behind. It's amazing folks who decide, even if they have the chance to leave Khartoum, to stay because of the children's centers, because of the women co-ops, because of all these amazing ideas that comes from the grassroots. They decide to stay and work, and nobody's getting paid, and everybody's working incredible amount of hours. And part of it is getting together, helping each other is really powerful. It's a powerful thing. And it's the one way you can get away and be okay with facing rapes, facing death, having a meal a day or a meal a half a day. Let's be frank, we're not providing 3 meals a day. So we're just going to the minimum. You have to understand that we rose from the point of just feeling that we're getting charity and we're just doing whatever and we could do this work or not, to the point like we have the right to eat, we have the right to survive. And that's why we're pushing for this money to come in, because the WFP, the UN, cannot bring their trucks in because we have RSF and SAF who do not care about us and who would not give them permits. And if you're waiting for safe passages and safe routes, you're not going to get it. And they're using food as a weapon. And this is a fact. But we're able to do it using our mutual aid. We're able to do it by talking to these traders, and traders who right now, they're not making money out of it. They're just surviving. So to me, we got to the point where we deserve this money. We'll fight for it. It is our right, and we want to get it. And a lot of people believe in that. A lot of people on the international side, a lot of people on the ground believe in it. And we're just like, let's do this together. There's a partnership. And we do not work with anybody who's not a partner with us. And with our partners, we're 100% transparent. And we tell them everything, even our problems. And the minute we realize somebody got raped or something happened, Francisco gets a call at 1 a.m. or whatever, and he gets the messages. And we expect him, and he does actually answer. So there is an urgency on the personal level. And I feel like everybody I dealt with had that. But still, on the institutional level, we're still unable to evacuate people on time. We had horrendous cases where we were supposed to evacuate people, we weren't able to, and one person died and 2 people got raped. So there's all these failures of the system. And so hopefully that will change.
I mean, you're mentioning some of the challenges that you're facing within the ERRs, and I think it's quite honest, right, to kind of admit to them, because I think the ERRs have also been very romanticized as this sort of savior mutual aid effort that has stepped in the 11th hour to fill the vacuum. But are there any flaws or limitations to the ERR model? Are there any security risks, for example?
Of course, there's a lot. I mean, without the partnership with local NGOs, without international NGOs and the UN, we would not have been able to do the work. So it's based on this partnership. The moment you try to come and tell us to do something like get a market assessment, it's just like, why would I know how to get a market assessment? I need to go to a local NGO and ask them, okay, how do you get the market assessment? The reason we able to survive is because we never tried to take on all of the work. The moment we want to evacuate people, we know that we cannot evacuate people if UNHCR is not part of the evacuation, and it's going to fail if they're not part of that. So we realized that we cannot do it alone. And I think from the beginning, we were very frank on what we can do, which is very clear. Like sometimes they're pushed to do something like the individual cash transfer, and we're like, we cannot do that. We cannot provide the amount of data. We cannot carry the cash and move it around. This is something that's beyond our abilities.
But I think where the romanticization can kick in is that I've seen horizontal governance at play, and it's chaos. And for, the idea that this perfect governance system that is localized and decentralized can work without breaking down, I find it surprising.
It's beautiful chaos. You have to be okay with it. You have to be okay with it. The way we operate requires a lot of respect and love. And we do have a charter and we do have systems and we do have things in place. So when we get people who are not paid, you are paid by the passion of it and you're paid by the love and by us protecting each other and working together. So the moment you have people who try to break that trust, who have personal things into them, it becomes really hard to deal with. And it's something that we're learning, like we're slowly learning. People have to step back sometimes to not get into fights. And then in the end, we realize that most of the people we have, and truthfully, I think everybody we have their hearts in the right place. And even when we had issues, we go back and we're like, oh, we just need to hug each other, which sounds really crazy, but a lot of the time we're all going through a hard time. Sometimes you'll be talking to somebody who just lost a family member or just got their home looted, who just had a friend who just got raped. So we have to be human. Within humanitarian aid, we have to be human. And sometimes we set up systems and we have to know that they need to be broken because in the end, humanity comes first.
Francesco, did you want to jump in there?
I fully agree with what Hajooj is saying. And I think when it comes to preventing the ERR structure to fail or to actually find challenges along this process, I think from our side is absolutely essential that we respect their structure, that we start collaborating with emergency rooms in a way that is respectful of their way of working and their modality of operation. Because the moment that we try to move from that, and the moment that we try to engage with these groups in a different way, that's exactly the moment in which we start undermining their way of being and undermining their way of operating on the ground. So it's very much important that the partnership that we have is not just mutual and is not just transparent, but is also respectful. So it's absolutely essential that as an international humanitarian community, if we are really committed to work with these groups, we need to understand these groups first. So it's very much important that we sit with them, that we listen more than talk, which is very difficult for international organization, I would say. But once we understand that, we can use our tools that are for sure not the best and the most fit for purpose, but we can use our tool to do the best that we can within the current context. But until we don't understand how these groups operate and what they really need from us, more the risk is that what we do is going to create problems and undermine their credibility and their capacity of operating and delivering on the ground.
But one of the issues that we haven't really talked much about, you referenced it very briefly earlier, that I can foresee being a challenge for NGOs or the UN to simply work with these groups as they are, is this question of neutrality. And Hajooj, you mentioned at the beginning that, the ERRs grew out of the resistance movement and so are political by nature. How, on the international community side, do you engage with this question of, but we can only work with completely neutral parties?
Neutrality in Sudan, in general, I would say is a very complicated principle to keep completely alive, in the sense that whoever you're going to engage with, inevitably you're going to have a political connection with a group or something. Just to give an example, for an international organization to collaborate with the HAC, which is the governmental entity that manages the humanitarian response, inevitably, you are recognizing an institution that is represented by one of the two conflict parties. You need to engage with them because otherwise you cannot operate. But inevitably, your principle of neutrality is undermined by the fact that you're engaging with a party that is not neutral in this discussion. And this is the first point. When it comes to engaging with emergency rooms, first of all, I think there is a need of distinguish between resistance committee and the emergency rooms. The emergency rooms are not necessarily made entirely by members of resistance committee. There's a lot of people that are member of the communities that are willing to help and to provide help to the community, but not necessarily they are extremely or in a vast majority engaged from a political perspective. So you have political actors within the emergency rooms, yes. Is the emergency rooms a political entity? No. The emergency rooms provide humanitarian response in the same way that the humanitarian actors are trying to do it, following a principle of neutrality. There's no discrimination in their provision of supplies, in the provision of help. They try to help wherever they can, according to the areas, engaging with the parties that are controlling the areas, because that's the way that you are supposed to do it in order to move in an environment that is strongly militarized. As international organization, we need to take our precautions because, of course, tomorrow there might be the risk that organizations that have been openly engaging with the emergency room might be targeted. Yes, is a risk, is there. But there are ways also of communicating and also engaging with the conflict parties. First of all, preventing the ERRs to be exposed. And second of all, at the end of the day, we are still talking about community members. So, and working with the communities in any humanitarian response should be at the basis. And when it comes to localization, there's nothing more localized than working with the community itself. So if using the word emergency rooms can be dangerous, using the word working with the community cannot be. And as a UN, I think our role is to back up our national and international organization when it comes to their engagement with these groups. We need to have a strategy that is clear, in which engagement with the community is at the basis of our modality, at the basis of our operational procedures. And based on that, we need to actually understand also the conflict parties that when it comes to deliver humanitarian services, we still apply a principle of neutrality. But if we can collaborate with groups that can deliver in areas where we are struggling, is in our mandate to actually do it.
It's really interesting to see the evolution of this, because even on this discussion that I mentioned earlier, I heard a number of Western government donors who seem to acknowledge that neutrality should no longer trump everything else and that the priority should be the delivery of aid. So interesting to see a bit of forward movement in that regard.
To us, we're actually care more about neutrality than the UN, than any other body. And we are non-political. But then that depends on your definition of politics, but we're non-political. We came from the ideas of transitional democracy, of separating powers and whatnot, and having a charter and having, this is the way we want to operate. That is political thought, but we're not a political party. We are neutral to 100%, where we do not want to be seen as we are with either fraction of the fighting RSF or SAF, to the point that if we are seen, we could be killed by one of them and we get arrested or we're not. Also, the area you're in can shift. You could move from one area into another. If you're living in an RSF area and you want to leave and you enter into a SAF area, you might get arrested. To the point that anytime they try to get us anything, like RSF is trying sometimes to get you food or something, we refuse it. There was one time where they went to one of our clinics and they brought some medicine. Everybody in the clinic ran away. And so RSF in the end had to take it back. And somebody went to RSF and explained to them that if we take anything from you, then this will be known. There's people in the community who are going to tell on us. And then if SAF comes and takes over the area, they will actually punish us, as we're collaborators with the RSF. So to us, neutrality is life or death. It's more important than what the UN is doing. And when it comes to politics, there's no politics being played. The ER is playing no politics whatsoever. We actually separated our members. So some members went to the ER and we have members who went to the resistance committees. Sadly to say, not even the resistance committees can do any politics that would stop this war. We actually got to the point where nobody seems to be able to be doing anything, which is really sad. I hope that they will be able to stop the war. And the majority amount of members of the ERs, which is way higher membership than the resistance committees, are members, community members, professionals, people who live in the community, people who are actually fixing our electricity, the service folks, the engineers, the doctors, but also the people who are cooking and whatnot. So the community itself.
I think it's incredible to see the ERRs and the UN and other INGOs trying to forge a partnership that has never been forged before as quickly as possible. And I think it's fair to say that this is a partnership born out of crisis and necessity. But I'm curious to know whether you think that this is a temporary shift. Is this just a stopgap measure? Or do you think that this new partnership is actually signaling a much more fundamental change in how INGOs and the UN and donors engage with community-based groups?
For me, this is the only thing I've seen. So it's the only thing that makes sense. I've not engaged in humanitarian aid otherwise. So to me, I'm hoping that humanitarian aid always looks like this. And I'm hoping the lessons we learned, we can pass on to other groups. And I'm hoping this is the way it's done. But I haven't seen another way of it being done. So now the hard answer has to come from Francisco.
I think from the UN side, this is one of the risks.
Yeah.
If I personally don't do the job in the way that I'm supposed to do it, and if the system doesn't support me along the process, I think there is a risk that this collaboration will be only linked to a lack of access in certain areas.
Yeah.
I can tell you, as part of my job and where I'm really putting the effort, and why I'm also so keen to document all the incredible work that this group of people are doing, is because the way that I foresee it is that we need to detach access issues from the engagement with emergency rooms if we really want to change our way of working. We need to start understanding that the emergency rooms are not the answer to the response, but they can play a complementary role to what we are doing. Is absolutely needed, the role of the UN is absolutely needed, the role of the NGOs, but there is room for this group to exist. And in order to allow these groups to be efficient and effective, we need to change our system in a way that allows them to play this role of being the first responders, to be the first one engaging with the community when a natural hazard or a conflict starts in a specific area. I think from now on, if you ask to me, from now on, international organization, UN agency, and national NGOs should always include in their picture the engagement with emergency rooms when it comes to the delivery of certain services. Doesn't matter if access tomorrow resume or not. I think, of course, our collaboration can change. Maybe because of resuming access in certain areas, the kind of role that the emergency rooms can play can be different. But overall, I think we need to approach it in a way in which we start really believing that the emergency rooms are complementary, are actors that are really useful in certain scenarios, in certain circumstances, are partners that should be always involved in certain type of conversation, because at the end of the day, they understand the context and they analyze the context in a way that as international community, we are incapable to do. And that's a collaboration that, in my opinion, should stand for a long, long time. Of course, the system needs to make an effort and change his way of operating. If we don't do that, yes, there is a major risk that this collaboration will stand until access challenges won't be resolved, and the organization will enter again in Khartoum rather than Darfur. But that would be a huge opportunity missed, in my opinion.
Hajooj, this last question is for you. You've been involved in all of these community-led efforts all throughout this transitional period, from the resistance committees that were crucial in toppling Omar al-Bashir in 2019, to the attempts to set up a civilian-led government, and now to the creation and operation of these emergency response rooms, which are at the front lines of humanitarian response. What do you think the next evolution of mutual aid efforts will be in Sudan? I mean, are we witnessing perhaps the foundation of what a future Sudanese state could look like?
I think we're very clear that this is a practice. The day after, which is a big thing that we should all be thinking about, how do we not turn into this stuck situation forever? How we do humanitarian aid will affect how that happens. The idea is that civilians are able to work in an organized way. So it's through structures, through talking together, through having meetings, through all that, is a practice of democracy that we never had in Sudan. Right now, what we're doing in the emergency response rooms is something that I never seen happen. The idea that there's this young 20-something-year-old rep who comes and asks me for accountability and I have to stand in front of them and explain what we did is amazing. The idea that I have to answer to them is amazing. Us practicing this democracy is really important, and us also realizing the limitations of the democracy. So the capacity building is a big thing, and that's another thing where we're dealing with, of actually writing everything we're doing, making sure everything is available, sending it down to the grassroots, and almost forcing people to be like, yo, you have to be part of this system. You have to understand what it is. You have to understand where the money is coming from. We will tell you where the money is coming from, and you have the right to say, no, we're not going to take that money. And so to us, it's very important, the realization that you set up a system, but in the end, it's individuals, and the individuals needs to uphold it. And this is all we're learning from this. And this is the thing that's giving us hope. We have no political hope. We have no clue how this is going to end. These two generals do not give us any hope of how this is going to end. We don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we see the light inside of us. And we feel like, yo, once this is over, and this will be over, we will hold it. We will continue. And that's why you see that people who are involved in this have hope, while people who are not involved in the mutual aid, who are not in Sudan, they feel that it's over, there's nobody alive, people are just getting raped and things are being destroyed and bombs are falling and it's the end of the world. Amazingly, out of this concrete, a rose will grow, and we're seeing it. And the only way we're having hope, and the only way I'm hopeful, is because I'm still resisting. I'm still part of this mutual aid. So I really feel like there is a point where anytime I see a Sudanese person who's depressed, the way to stop being depressed is to actually be part of mutual aid.
I don't think I've ever heard and humanitarian aid policy intersect quite so effectively. Thank you, Hajooj. But also really interesting to think about humanitarian relief as an entry point to a broader shift of power within Sudanese society, and also a model that may well be the way forward in many other places, including right now Gaza comes to mind, where, of course, attacks by Israel are escalating. And I could imagine mutual aid being one of the only ways in which that society will be able to help itself. Hajooj, Francesco, thank you so much for taking the time to give us such a window into this model and its potential.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Hajooj Kuka is the External Communications Officer for the Khartoum State Emergency Response Rooms. And Francesco Bonanome is the focal person for the emergency response rooms at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Sudan.
Hajooj, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
When we first spoke, we were 6 months into the war in Sudan. Today, you're joining me from Berlin, just a few days away from the first anniversary of the conflict. What's life been like for you in the last 6 months?
It's been 6 months of trying to help people on the ground with the mutual aid, with all that, but also battling with people that, although we got the recognition, although everybody now talks about the emergency response rooms and they believe in it, and we had this phase where we got some funding, we started looking for the second phase. So we went from one phase where we wanted recognition, we wanted enough money to start working, to prove ourselves, and we got those pilots and we got that money and we kind of proved ourselves to everybody. But now the money was just not enough because what happened through that period of 6 months is more and more people know about the emergency response rooms, more people are using our kitchens, more people are using our resources, and with internet being cut in Khartoum, a lot of people who used to use internet and online banking to get help from outside, they lost it. So suddenly we now have way more people using the emergency response rooms, kitchens and everything. And with what's happening in Darfur, the emergency response rooms in Darfur became more active. And there was a political decision that happened where the army decided that the UN should not enter anything into Sudan through the RSF-held areas. And this political decision made it that suddenly the UN has to stop their operations. And Darfur, that was dependent on all this food coming in, now stopped coming in. So suddenly the emergency response rooms there, who were doing more health and psychosocial support, suddenly found themselves they need to also do kitchens and all that. So now the need for that increased. So suddenly the ERs, the amount of money that we raised was not enough. And we're going to another phase where we're trying to prove ourselves that, we can do even more. And we are a big partner in the response to a famine that's coming. The kitchens are now one step from allowing the famine to happen. So hopefully we will help with the partnership from the world to not go into that spiral of going into a famine that once you hit that spiral, it's hard to get out of.
Well, when we spoke, there seemed to be a lot of enthusiasm between you and Francesco that the international community was starting to wake up to the critical role that you were playing on the front lines in terms of the humanitarian response in Sudan, and there was a desire to support you more. So how has that relationship evolved in the last 6 months?
I think at that time we were like pushing and trying to get people to just wake up to the importance of mutual aid and the power that we have in Sudan. And I think we got to the point where everybody who matters believes in that, and everybody who matters talks about it. But at the same time, like right now, we're talking, and a year into the war, there's a big conference that's happening in Paris. And in the paperwork, they talked about the emergency response rooms, but they decided not to invite us because they think it's too complicated to invite a group that is mutual aid, that is so big, that there's so many people. So they thought it's too complicated to have us there. They believe in us enough to write us in their paperwork, but they still think that they can negotiate and talk about it without us being on the table because it's too complicated. So I feel like the system still does not have space for mutual groups. They don't have space for us to be on the forefront. So it's almost, they want to support us, but keep us below a certain level. So what we believe in, and I think what we talked a lot about, is what level we think we should reach as mutual aid. We still aim for the 5%. 5% of humanitarian aid that comes to Sudan should go through the emergency response rooms or the frontline mutual aid groups, whatever they are. And we believe that 5% can go a long way when in the hands of the mutual aid groups. Way bigger than what big international organizations can do. But at the same time, we just want to be a partner. So we feel like we can get up to 20% of the aid we can provide, but there's a limit to what we can do. So it's not like we don't think we can take over and do everything. Like for definitely we need to be in partnership with everybody else. I mean, when it comes to the international community, I think we got to the point where, okay, we don't have to prove ourselves anymore when it comes to talk. But then when everything else, we have to prove ourselves every single day. Can we scale up is the question. Can we continue? It's been a year. It's been a year that we're volunteers. I haven't gotten paid anything in this whole year, working 18 hours a day. There's all these people doing, and there's still the question, would the volunteers stick through? Would the volunteers continue working as volunteers? A week ago, we had a volunteer in Bahri who passed away. He was one of the guys who was really key to the kitchens in Bahri working. And he got sick, and we didn't even have enough money to support him because at the time we were like completely broke. So we don't even have a system to support our own volunteers. Every time there's a volunteer who needs help, a lot of times everybody from the volunteers has to put some money towards it. So still, yes, they support us. Yes, they're trying to figure out ways, but they didn't get to the point where their systems can actually push fast. So when we have our next chunk of money coming, it's still going to be like once promised. We have to wait for 3 to 6 months still to get the next chunk of money. Although we already went through this before, we're still going through it again. So it's still not as smooth as I hoped it would be a year later. The money promise is bigger, but we have to wait for reporting. We have to like again prove ourselves. Can we scale up or not?
A lot of this funding, as we had discussed, comes from the Sudan Humanitarian Fund. It's run by OCHA, and it collects donor contributions from mainly governments into one single fund. And back when we spoke, there was a figure you mentioned that stayed with us quite a bit, and that figure was $2 million. That's what was promised to the ERRs out of the Sudan Humanitarian Fund. But back then, you had only received $200,000 of that $2 million, despite the fact that there's an urgent need, as you said. So what happened to that initial $2 million that was promised 6 months ago? Has it come through?
It's coming through. We already got $1.5 million, and we already spent it. To me, we proved that we spend it, and the impact from that $1.5 million has been huge. We're getting the rest of the money slowly. It's slower than what we want. What happens is we're very fast at spending the money on the ground, but some of the organizations we're working with require a level of reporting that takes a really long time, especially that internet is cut. We have to use satellite internet now. We're using Starlink to connect. So to connect with people on the ground and to allow them to do all these reporting is becoming harder and harder, and we don't get the money unless these reportings go through. But we're doing it, and we're hoping by the end of May we would have spent the whole money. And we were hoping to get a new chunk. And this time we're trying to raise $20 million. And this time it's for also Darfur, Sinnar, Medeni. And since we talked, the conflict area has increased. So the number of people is way bigger. And now there's a famine. So we're trying to get to the 20 million mark.
So which donors have been supporting you? For example, USAID said back in the fall that they did want to support the ERRs more. Have they done so?
So there is a promise right now of getting more funding. We heard that from higher up, they're pushing that more money comes our way. So we're expecting more money to come our way. They did support us in the part of the 2 million that we got is from USAID. And right now there's a push to get more money from USAID. So the Sudan Humanitarian Fund that gets funding from USAID got more money. NRC, I think, also got more money from BHA. So there is a strong push that's coming from USAID. We're trying to convince more the European side, but for some reason we heard that the European side, and I think this is their own internal politics, they see us more aligned with the US for some reason. So now they're like thinking like, this is a US thing. So I don't understand this internal politics within humanitarian aid. So we're trying to convince more now the ECHO side of the people. And I think this is part of not being invited to Paris officially, although we're featured in a lot of their writings. But I feel like, yes, on the US side, there's more push on the higher side. So from Samantha Powers and people at that level to try to push money to us. But still, there is their systems that they have to overcome to try to make that happen. Now we're hoping we're going to get 20 million. So let's see if that happens. The people from USAID, from BHA, from ECHO are saying they would provide that. I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm hoping it's going to happen. And if they agree on it, then we have to convince the international NGOs in the middle that, yes, we can do it. Our accountability processes are in place. We just had a big workshop in Kampala where we re-looked into our internal systems and we're improving them. And we're trying to get our partners to see that energy and all these people that are working on it. And I'm hoping they look to us as partners and we work together into making this happen. And they put the idea of doing things on the ground at the forefront and agree with our reporting methods, which again are based on reporting to our community first and then to the international community second. And I think the accountability level within our community is way higher, and how we account to our community is way more straightforward and important than even with the international communities. So hopefully it will work out, and hopefully we will manage to do it in time to have a real response to the famine. I think the big thing that we're noticing with the international community is the lack of urgency. Everything takes so long. So to be like, we have to fight famine. If you do something now, we have a chance. But if you wait until 3 months, then we'll just be dealing with just responding to whatever's happened to the ground. So hopefully they will manage to do everything quicker.
It strikes me that you had the same level of optimism, but the same criticism that there's a lack of urgency. And I'm curious to know what keeps you hopeful that, after 6 months of what seems to be the same level of bureaucracy and the slow-moving system, that things can actually change. What keeps you hopeful?
I think what gives us hopeful is we went from these different phases. So we went from the first phase, which was 100,000, where we're actually internally building and depending more on mutual aid and on people helping each other out, to the next phase where we had 2 million. So we proved it to ourselves. We managed to keep these kitchens open, and we managed to keep the volunteers excited because they're given so much to their people and they're important. So we managed to get to that level that emergency response rooms are important. But it is sad that we still have to go through this paperwork that I don't even know who initiates it. I've always heard that famines are man-made. Famine is a political thing. And I feel like right this moment, I know that famine is a political decision by the warring parties to use food as a weapon. But also I'm noticing that it is a bureaucracy too. Like if now the UN, if now the big agency of ECHO and BHA all decide that we're gonna put bureaucracy aside and we're gonna put the money to the ground, and then we will work on this parallel scheme of figuring out the paperwork while things are on the ground, not figure out the paperwork, then give things on the ground, then famine would be saved. Like, then we have a bigger chance on solving things. We always tell people, like, if you give me 5,000, let me prove it on the ground, instead of waiting and then having these gaps. So right now we're gonna have this gap in between May and maybe July, where we don't really have any more money. So it'll be, again, we finish the 2 million, we don't have much money, we will have like maybe 50,000, maybe 100, and then suddenly money will kick in. Then the gap of these communal kitchens drying up and not having food is disastrous. So is it gonna be okay or not? But in the end, we're hopeful because people are on the ground, people are still cooking every single day, people are still struggling.
As we approach 1 year of the conflict in Sudan, what would you like the international aid sector to know about what they need to do most urgently to support you?
I mean, coming a year into the war, it's baffling how the legitimacy in the war is still in the hand of the warring factors. It's baffling that when you go to Paris, we're not there. It's baffling that we're still seen as a side thing, although nothing else happened. Like, the only growth that you would see in this concrete, the only rose that grew, the only crack that happened is mutual aid, is the people helping each other. But at the same time, it seems that everybody's looking towards the warring factors to end the war. And I feel like it is time to see that what really matters is humanitarian aid. What is going to stop this war is when we really concentrate on what is happening on the ground. And I think the time to start listening to us and talking seriously to us instead of like playing with the political game. So take away the legitimacy from these warring factors. It's like, we're gonna give the food supplies to the mutual aid groups, and they are the ones who are gonna give it inside the places that are fighting. And we're not gonna use food as a political tool or as a weapon. And the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna give the food to the mutual aid groups. So if it's in Darfur, we're gonna give it to them, and they're gonna do whatever they can do, and we're just gonna keep the supply coming in. Stop negotiating with these armies when it comes to humanitarian aid. Stop asking them for access. We can do it, just keep giving us the stuff. And the roads are open. They do not control the roads. It's just mythical. SAF does not control the roads in Darfur, and stop acting like they do.
The end of our last interview, you mentioned that volunteering for the emergency response rooms was the one thing that gave you hope for the future of Sudan, and that in a way it was perhaps a glimpse into what a post-war democratic society could look like in Sudan. Do you still feel that same level of excitement and inspiration from volunteering with these emergency response rooms?
I learned a lot. Democracy is very hard. The bigger the system, the more money we have, the more people involved, the more there's discussions, the more there's different opinions. So I feel like democracy is never going to be easy, but it is the way forward. It's the only way we can do it. I feel like this experiment in democracy is super important, and by the end of it, I know I don't want to be part of politics. I don't want to be a representative. I don't want to be any of that. I don't like politics, and I wish I can go back to just filmmaking and enjoying life. And you always want these other people to go and do it, but we have a lot of youth who are part of it, who I think they like it, and they're learning. They're learning how to lobby, how to get together, how to have an argument that's based on services. And I like that in the end, we always are reminded that what we do is to provide services. And we're always reminded by having like somebody pass away, like Omar just passed away, that it's all about the people on the ground. They're the ones who matter. In the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's not about ideologies. It's not about all that. It just boils down to who can provide the services, what are the priorities. So I feel like it is a great experiment. I'm hoping it will transfer into what a democracy in Sudan will look like. And I feel like it proved to all of us what sometimes people say. It's like, I don't know if it's out of racism or what, when they say these Africans, democracy is not for them. It's just like, yo, democracy is for us, and we can figure it out. It looks different, but we managed to, in the end, figure out a way to work together and to have a communal way of decision making. And I think our communal way of decision making is beautiful. It looks like us, and I believe in it. I also believe that The mutual aid experiment in Sudan is revolutionary, and I feel that it should be studied and it should change how humanitarian aid is looked at. And I believe what we do is important, and it is something that could be done in other places. We should be looked at and learned from.
Hajooj, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
That was Hajooj Kuka, External Communications Officer for the Khartoum State Emergency Response Rooms and a filmmaker. We also received an audio update from Francesco Bonanome, the Humanitarian Affairs Officer for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Francesco says that OCHA has been playing a key role in bringing together the international community and the emergency response rooms, and that includes chairing ERR coordination meetings to share best practices on how to support mutual aid groups, as well as holding a meeting back in February between the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, and the American delegation of Sudan's emergency response rooms. But as Hajooj pointed out, Francesco does concede that challenges remain in getting the ERRs the urgent support they need.
OCHA has continued to play a pivotal role in facilitating the engagement between the international community and the emergency rooms and other mutual aid groups. The Sudan Humanitarian Fund also designed a new allocation of 6.5 million to support the emergency rooms and other mutual aid groups. And this allocation has currently selected the international partners and is expected to start in the coming month. Overall, the international community has manifested a bigger interest in supporting these type of actors, and other donors has also manifested interest in systematizing more this modality within their operational and strategic approach. In this respect, further funding from other actors as well are expected, and therefore the continued support to the emergency rooms will continue to be a reality in the coming future. Some challenges continue to be in place. Unfortunately, the system is still not completely fit for purpose, and there are delays in allocating the funds in certain parts of the country. And when funds are not allocated in time, some of these interventions are inevitably closed, impacting the population on the ground. On top of that, the documentation required to ensure accountability diversifies from partner to partner. This type of approach is confusing and is creating problems to the emergency rooms in actually implement certain type of intervention with one actor, but facing maybe different challenges with another, while trying in any case to deliver the same type of services. In this sense, a more homogeneous approach among the different actors, including the donors, will be required in order to systematize more this type of requirements, so that actually the collaboration with these actors will be facilitated and strengthened. Getting near to the 1 year mark from the beginning of the conflict, other challenges are also still very visible. Humanitarian access is still very limited, and the funds in support to this humanitarian operation are still very little. Therefore, while we are continuing to discuss with the warring parties to ensure actually accessibility to certain areas, and we continue the advocacy at the highest level to gather more financial support for the operation, continue to have discussion with the emergency rooms and strengthen this type of collaboration as part of a complementary response in support to the population of Sudan, especially considering the current food crisis situation across the country, and other major challenges and lack of access to basic services that a lot of the population of Sudan is currently facing. I would like to reiterate the big step forward that the international community has actually put in place in order to support this type of groups and to embrace a new modality that is very new for Sudan and is very new for the vast majority of the international partners working within this country. However, if the intention is to actually systematize more this type of approach and collaboration, and to make sure that actually these mutual aid groups will continue to play a role even in the medium-long term, further support and further discussion among international partners will be needed in order to ensure actually that this type of collaboration will be more efficient, more rapid, and more strict to the point. I believe there is an opportunity here for Sudan and for the international community to really change and show a different way of providing humanitarian aid. And therefore, in this sense, I think OCHA and the rest of the international community is in the right direction, but further effort is needed and will need to be provided.
That was Francesco Bonanome, a humanitarian affairs officer for OCHA Sudan. As always, if you have any thoughts about this episode, write to us or leave us a voice note at podcast@thenewhumanitarian.org. This updated episode was hosted by me, Melissa Fundira, and originally co-hosted with Heba Ali. It was produced by me and sound engineered by Mark Nieto. Original music by Whitney Patterson. Thank you for listening to Rethinking Humanitarianism.